Okay, hi James. Thanks for joining.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So, just so everybody knows, we had a really cool conversation earlier this summer about the ideas in my book and the idea of catharsis and how it relates to metal music and stuff like that. And so I asked James if he would be interested in doing a Skype conversation. One of the things from my end is I think metal music has actually a kind of complicated psychology going on. So it's one of the more interesting things to talk about. And I think it's bad music, but there's still a lot to talk about. And as you know, I, I usually like and get along with people who are into metal music. There's some kind of overlap between metal and heavy classical, which is maybe one of the things we can talk about. But
Uh,
okay, so we talked a
that's
lot about metal music and the idea of what I call anti-catharsis. I don't think we were using that term at the time, but
right.
because your question really originally was um, if settling incomplete emotions is what makes good music good, how does that apply to something like metal?
Right.
And my answer was,
It's
it's a breaking apart of the emotional being, not a pulling together of it. But what were you going to say?
right. So, something I'm not. I definitely think there's as a metal fan, I'm definitely going to be slow to accept this.
Yeah.
Even though I'm clearly listening to you and asking you questions, so clearly I think I'm probably going to end up agreeing with you at the end of the day. But I still, it's a large claim to make, and so one of the questions I asked, and it's worth washing through my mind again, um, is what exactly about the emotional progression of metal music makes it destructive, or if there's a different word you would use other than destructive.
No, destructive, I think, is a very accurate word. But it's the noise content, uh, the guitar distortion, the Cookie Monster voice, or whatever you want to call it, the growly voice, all that kind of stuff, and the hardcore percussion noise. Um, and there's the brutality aspect of the heavy driving, that kind of thing, which is a relentless kind of thing. Actually, maybe it's stupid for me to bring up things I read in the Wikipedia article on metal music, but there were a couple of really good quotes in there. Anyway, there was something about it said that metal is the psychological or sensual equivalent of war. Uh,
Wow.
and
Huh.
that I thought that is very accurate because it's we talked about like
Some of it is, at least some of it I see it. Some of it is some things that are called metal, I would say are more, you might characterize them more as screamo. If you're
what would you
aware of
say
that
is that
genre.
is a subcategory or a separate category?
Um, it's generally, from what I understand, it's considered a separate category, but a lot of metal has the emotional content of screamo music, and that's actually the type of metal that, even though it has the same, it has the same. A lot of the bands that play metal will also play these types of music. It's the type of metal I don't like personally.
Yeah.
I this is just my own personal categorization, but I discriminate against music that's the sort of the equivalent of war, the emotional equivalent of war, and music that's the emotional equivalent of, oh, poor me, suffering, kind of the
Self pity.
warfare. I use the metal as sort of a as a motivating as a motivating sound, as like a,
Mm-hmm.
like forward, like, like an like a cavalry charge or something.
Yeah.
Not so much like, oh, poor me, I'm just going to scream about how angsty and depressed I am.
Yep.
Not so much my style. So that's a distinction I make, if that's
Yeah.
relevant.
No, I know.
Yeah.
I know what you mean because the um, focus of my whole disagreement with people about modern music, and this is not just you, but pretty much everybody, is people think driving noise is power, but nothing else really comes into their mind as counting as power. And my argument is, well, there are tons of forms of power, and there are many ways in which you can get energized And why is this particular one the one that people are drawn to as the real, the real or right or emotionally resonant kind of power, and everything else is, outside of consideration or forgotten about or whatever, not considered appealing? So there's a comparative thing, because Beethoven is powerful,
Yeah.
but how is it different? How is it the same? Beethoven has zero unpitched percussion. There's no snare drum, no bass drum, no cymbal. Um, I think he may use a cymbal and triangle in the Ninth Symphony. Um, but aside from that, same thing with the Brahms symphonies. Brahms uses a triangle once in the Fourth Symphony, the last one. Aside from that, there's absolute zero noise percussion. Um, so all of the power there is accomplished with notes. It's all accomplished with, clear classical tones, making patterns and harmonies and themes and all of that. So my big challenge to this idea, and I know that everybody feels it, is why is the form of power that's real the one that people want today, which noisy hammering, bashing, um, loud, 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 yelling. Uh, and that leaves out all nuance. So I know that there is more nuance. That there's going to be some kind of actual melodic content in the screaming, um, some kind of rhythmic riffs inside of the hammer power. But I'm trying to play up the contrast, right? Of the noise mayhem power versus orderly symphonic power.
Well, when you start making that distinction, and I can only speak for myself here, I start to wonder: is it the noise content of metal that appeals to me, or more of the power? And maybe I just haven't had my mind opened to these different types of power, or
Mm-hmm.
like displays of strength. Maybe would be
Yeah.
another way of phrasing it. But I think a way to demonstrate how I personally am not particularly loyal to the pounding and the non melodic percussion. When I think of one of my preferences, even above maybe normal metal, would be Apocolyptica, and they're four cellos that play metal music, but they're with cellos, and so it comes off as this combination of metal and classical.
Yep.
They do, some of their pieces have drums in it, but I think it's the cellos that I'm actually attracted to.
Interesting, because the cello you can sort of chop the bow on the string in a hard way. It makes, even though it's tones, it makes a real hard articulation. Uh,
Right.
so that's where the crossover element happens, right? Because you've got the classical tones, but the uh, hard percussive aspect of more of a metal feel.
They do both. They do those hard strokes, but they don't rely on them entirely. I
Okay.
mean, if I had to say, give a number, it's like 20% of what they're doing. A lot of it is actually long, drawn out, classical sounding
Yeah.
strokes.
Yeah. See, this is where we get into this territory of the mix of classical and metal, because it's always been a thing in the metal world, and sometimes it's like you set up the classical sound and then you blast it to oblivion with the hardcore metal sound. And even Bohemian Rhapsody does that to some extent. That it's pretty operatic and symphonic in its manic madcap kind of way, up to the point where it's and then it's headbang, right? Um, so that kind of does it. That's a piece that also is in this area that blends some of the classical scope, heavy classical or dramatic classical, with the metal stuff. But I'm trying to sort out the principle of uh, integrative music versus chaos driving music. We talked about, for instance, the sad converts to mad pattern.
Right.
and that there's sometimes a morose kind of feeling that amps up into being ragey, screamy, ragey. Was it One? Is that the song we were talking about that does that?
Yeah, one does that. Its lyrics represent a theme of going from sort of um, a sleepy kind of like, like what, like it's someone injured coming to sort of
Yep.
sensation,
Yeah.
and then there's this recoiling and horror at the idea that, oh, like I have no control over my life anymore and I'm subjected to oblivion. And then it's this screaming and horror, not so much anger, but screaming at horror at the end.
Okay.
That's the emotional progression of that song.
Okay. Which is a
That's
perfect
not so much of a
example.
sad converts to mad, not really. But one
Okay.
can certainly listen to it thinking of it that way, I think.
If you ignore the lyrics, you mean?
I think so, yeah. I think
Yeah.
if you
But
yeah.
it is a perfect center of the page example of the anti-catharsis idea, because it's not like I worked through my troubles and got to a state of being okay with things, or I worked through my troubles and ultimately was victorious. It's I ruminated on my troubles and I really spiraled out of control.
Right, and in the plot of the song, he certainly has a good reason for spiraling out of control. But this is not, I guess your argument would be music is for the living, not for the dead, like this poor guy in the song who's subjected to oblivion, basically.
Yeah, well, this is where we get to the question of evaluating means versus evaluating ends, or kind of both, because the usual way of thinking that people have today is that you evaluate the means and the end, the thematic idea that the artist is trying to put forth is beyond question because an artist can choose whatever theme they wish. And that's true, but some themes are either destructive or false or whatnot. So that has to be taken into account. So this
Yeah,
is the kind of thing that I'm bringing up. So I would say, the means of accomplishing the theme in this song is effective, and the theme is anti-catharsis.
right. Would you compare it? I'm thinking of a movie example of this. I think of basically pick any Coen Brothers movie, except for The Big Lebowski. That one's just a joke. But think of No Country for Old Men.
Okay, that's not one I've seen, but you
Actually,
have.
you haven't seen that one.
No.
Actually, I don't think that's actually a very good movie. But uh, what's a different one that's. But in general, I think the Coen brothers do a very good job at presenting plots that may really make you feel like nothing matters and everything's just a chaos and there's no hope of like making sense of anything. They do a really good job at presenting that. It's completely consistent theme. They don't have like a hero thrown in just for spice. They don't have a romance thrown in just to keep the audience happy. Like, no, it's everything sucks and everything's chaos, and they're very consistent, so their means are great, but the end is the worst thing I could imagine. Like
Yes.
I end up when I first saw the movies, I was really confused by how I liked it, but then didn't like it, and I think maybe that was what I was noticing.
Yeah, see, that's the thing about
So
all effective or well done art that's on a destructive theme is that it is effective in the sense that it pulls you in and you are with it and in it and it fills you and gets you going, but it's ultimately a downer. It's like my
right,
ultimate example of this is reading Crime and Punishment, um, because I went through the book pretty quick, and then the people that I was talking to, my friends, were like, "Why are you in such a bad mood?" And I was like, I don't know, I just am. And then I start talking about Crime and Punishment, and they're like, "Oh, you read that book? That's why you're in
right.
such a bad mood." uh, so that's a perfect example. Okay, so I want to come back to the song one because there's a whole bunch of things that I had to bring up about that. Um, you and I looked at the version on YouTube that people did with two harps,
Hmm.
which is fascinating to me because there we learned quite a lot, points that I made and points that you made. Your point was that um, the screaming in terror at the vision of the future that comes at the end does not come across at all in the harp version. Is that accurate?
Yeah, it's like they're playing the same notes, they're playing it at the same speed, but it just okay, now there's just a bunch of stuff happening. Like the harps are able to capture the sense of like sort of sleepiness and like waking up from a dream or something with like a vague fear in the
Uh-huh.
background or something. And then once you get to the part where they're saying darkness imprisoning me, and like all this stuff. Like once they get to that, it just sounds like a bunch of
Yeah,
just
it's
a bunch of like
way too
quick
delicate.
notes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it just sounds like a bunch of notes. Like it can, I don't even know what it conveys emotionally. It's just it conveys a bunch of notes. Is all I
Yeah.
really.
Well, see, that particular thing is, for me, an excellent study because my complaint primarily about the irrationality of the mental process has to do with the noise elements. And when you play it on a harp, or if we transferred it to any acoustic instrument, even acoustic guitar or piano, there you hear the tones of the music and nothing else. No gravel, no grit, no yelling, and it's just the musical content. Then you can kind of separate out those other elements and then look at some of the more pure emotional content.
And I think a song you should definitely listen to in order to test the hypothesis I think you're making here
Yeah.
is listen to Apocolyptica's version of the song One.
Okay.
They have their own version. Now, I'm not sure exactly if you would consider it gravelly, distorted, and concussive at the end,
Yeah.
but it's definitely less so than the Metallica song.
Yeah.
But it still conveys the same sense of horror at the end. So your point is that once you take away the grit and the once you take away the grit and the distortion of the actual tones themselves, you're saying you lose the essence of metal. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Partly. What this example shows is that the savage element still has to be there in order for the feeling to be the right feeling, right? Because partly what they succeed in conveying is that savage, whatever that name is for that headbangy, heavy, hardcore driving
Right.
thing is. It's there's a primal savagery to that, and the cellos succeed in getting some of that percussive grit. And obviously, if they were only doing like ja ja long tones, that changes things. But jump 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 jump,
Yeah.
that's more of that pummel your brain savagery kind of thing. But the thing that I was going to bring up on this song One and the different versions of it, like the harp one, is there's a very distinctive feeling of stagnant, morose emotion in the early part, which in a way is beautiful, but is also stagnant. It doesn't have a sense of harmonic progression and working toward resolution. That's my point about it's not working through toward cathartic resolution. It's wallowing or just kind of ruminating in a dark place. But that stagnant melancholy element hooks up with another psychology point that I wanted to make, which is that we talked about masochism in metal, and I think that the undercurrent of the genre emotionally is self-loathing. It's like self-mutilation, only psychological instead of physical.
And you say that literally because just the harshness of the tones are just the same thing as just like rubbing sandpaper across your brain.
I don't want to make it sound like it's a pure sensory issue, because that's part of the
Okay,
part of
that's
the
part of
means.
it, right?
Yeah, it is part of the means, absolutely. But
Okay.
it's a question of the emotional content and where it goes. And so my single fundamental point about music is that music is a form of self-expression with emphasis on the word self, and that the statement that a piece makes is, what kind of being am I? I am the kind of being that has or needs or wants this kind of experience. And the emotional content of the metal I know is very self-hating stuff. It's not music that treats yourself well, that is caring or loving toward your pain, that is cathartic, that is helping you work through something. It's not sensuously beautiful and sensitive. And I'm not saying that all music has to be soft or delicate or anything, but um, it's the savage element and the sensory overload and the harshness and the emotional rawness is the summary term I would have to give. It's like raw emotion being rubbed raw. Uh, and in that whole thing is, a kind of medieval self-torture thing. There's a reason there's a band called Iron Maiden, right? Uh, it's like medieval self-flagellation. I can't stand to live with myself. And I mentioned to you before, you said you're not big on the headbanger kind of motion, but I was saying that, that specific thing, it's like, when you go into a mental institution and see crazy people, they are banging their head against the wall like that because they can't stand to hear the voices in their heads, or they can't stand to live with their being. And the head banging in that case is a direct expression of self-hatred and desire for self-destruction. So this is my central thematic concern with metal, is that it's so driven or animated or hooking up with a form of self-loathing.
Hmm. For me personally, I don't know. I mean, that would be a psychological revelation for me to find out that I hate myself. Like that's when you talk about how the music is reflective of how one treats the self. Do you treat yourself with tenderness? Is one of the sort of questions that you asked. And so obviously metal is not brimming with tenderness. It's sort of it's the opposite, but I don't think that's a self-punishment. It's for me, I can only really speak for myself here, but for me, it's like I'm my own drill sergeant, basically. I'm saying, get up. Like I know you're hurting, but get up. Like, well, there's no part where it's like, I know you're hurting. There's no sympathy. It's just get up. There's more things to do. Like, I know the world is hard and you have to defeat it. Like that's the tone I take from it personally.
Right. Okay. See,
Definitely self-hatred in other of these songs, but I tend to not like those songs.
That's interesting.
For example, one is not one of my favorite Metallica songs. It's one of my least favorite Metallica songs.
Okay. What about the ones you do like?
So some of the ones I do like, one of my favorites is called The Outlaw Torn.
Okay.
And I think I already mentioned this to you, but it bears repeating because this is like a particular image I personally associate with metal. Is it has this? There's, by the way, I'm talking about the S&M version. S&M stands for Symphony and Metallica. Okay. That's where they play with classical music classical music, but they play with a symphony backing them up, and they don't. To be honest, they actually don't do a great job when I really think about it of combining the two, but it works for me somehow, even though the quality could have been better. But anyway, so in the Outlaw Torn, there's this like sort of marching sound, dun, 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 and then every once in a while there's this like kind of like sound, like the wrenching sound of pain, and I imagine like a man like walking through the desert with like a bullet hole in his leg, and he's just walking, and then the camera, it's a movie, I guess, the camera zooms out, and when you hear the symphony play, the symphony plays when you see this beautiful city in the distance, like beyond the desert, and he's walking towards that.
Okay. So
like that's the image that sort of I could easily summarize my attitude about metal with that image paired with that song.
Okay, so there's an aspirational thing going on there. But there's also the War is Hell universe kind of thing. Saving Private Ryan or whatever, Vietnam movie you want to call to mind. where it's
Right.
just like so much effing carnage that it's like incomprehensible. Um,
Yeah.
but the reason I was smiling earlier is there's a reason they chose that double entendre of calling it S&M,
Right. Of course. Yeah. Of course.
right?
Yeah.
Um, and there's all the other stuff of how they dress and how they what makeup and smashing the guitars on stage and
Right.
all that stuff. Um, but okay, so you're saying that a song like that one has an aspirational element of going somewhere. And the most interesting point you're
For me,
making.
it does. I can't claim it's objectively in there for everyone. I know for me it is.
Okay.
Maybe you could analyze it and say it is in there objectively. I don't have that ability
Yeah, but you
to
already
claim that.
you already described some real factors of what is there, like the kind of sound that it is and the image that's projected, and that gives enough of an indication to say that it's
Okay.
a real thing and not just something in your head. Um,
Okay.
so, and there's a musical change, right? When the change takes place from the bloody, feeling of like I'm dragging my damaged body through the desert. There's a musical change to the aspirational vision of the city of like I'm going to keep going because there's somewhere for me to go.
Yeah, yeah. I can see how you can say that that's objectively in there to some extent because someone who's just like a screamo sort of angsty, I hate myself sort of person, when they hear that aspirational like rising motion of the symphony, that part doesn't seem like it should be in there. Or it
Right.
would seem not quite right to them. So it's like, okay, you can't read the other context into this sound. You can pretty much only read my context into it or something similar.
Yeah.
So I can see why you're so confident about that.
Is the word screamo a very, very recent word? I'm wondering partly is it a parallelism with the term emo?
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's supposed to be
Okay.
emo, but it's more angry, basically.
Okay.
It's my
Because
understanding.
emo means like um, cheesy self-expression, right? Like sappy feeling.
Um, I always took I don't listen to emo, but I always took it to mean sort of a like I always took it to mean the feeling sorry for yourself music,
Yeah.
and that's in there. But some of it is a little bit of like sappy, over the top. It's not all feeling sorry for yourself.
Right.
There are songs that are kind of like they're dramatic, but in sort of like a silly like kind of. I'm literally
Right.
making the sound like like
Yeah.
kind of way. Yeah.
Right. So childish, silly, um, sappy, so-called sensitive music.
But yeah, it's self-aware of its own
Yeah.
sappiness.
Well,
It's
see,
not
there's
being
another.
done. It's
That's
being
another.
done on purpose.
Yeah. That's a whole thing to talk about also with metal and the related genres because the this is Spinal Tap, is a satire film, but it's not that different from what you actually really literally see on stage, and
Right. Right.
it's just
I
kind of
actually didn't see. I didn't even find the movie funny because I'm like, okay, like for that very reason. It's just like, yeah, this is already being done.
right. Uh, so there, see, this is my, getting to my concerns about the underlying psychological impulse of, this kind of music. There's the self-loathing element, and there's also the idea that with kind of mayhemy self-destruction stuff and that kind of feeling and impulse, um, there's also usually an element of I'm totally ridiculous that goes with it. Uh,
Yeah, that's true. Metal does have a lot of that.
with like all of the over the
Yeah.
top pageantry and like to sing in a voice that's like a ridiculous throaty animal voice, but then to call it Cookie Monster is
Right.
is like that is making fun of yourself, and it's like in a way it like diffuses the seriousness of it, but in a way it fits with it because the I'm ridiculous somehow fits together with I'm gonna wreck myself.
Here's my personal psychoanalysis of that particular facet of some metal. Yes, like a good example of this is the show Metalocolypse.
Okay.
You ever heard of that?
No.
So, yeah, it's a cartoon about a metal band. The metal band is called Deathclock, I think, and it's just a total satire of metal. But the thing is that Deathclock, the cartoon band, they make a bunch of actual songs for the show, but they're always parodies of themselves. So, for example, there's one song, it actually parodies the type of metal I like, where it's like, we're on a journey. I forget exactly how it goes. Like, we're on a journey. We keep walking. And it's like, so that's literally my same image there. And so the ridiculousness of it is sort of, generated by like how it's this constant struggle. And so it's this, they're self-aware of like how ridiculous that's supposed to be. Only it's kind of funny because I think what they're doing is I think it's separate from what you're talking about. To me, what they're doing is that it's too, at the end of the day, it's very hard to really express your emotions. And so sometimes, especially an emotion like that, like, I mean, that image of like crawling through the desert in some sense is very near to my heart. And so it's hard to even express that. And so I think some people feel the need to sort of mask it with humor, as though to say like, well, I don't really feel like that. You're camouflaging value.
Yeah. Okay. Well, there's always, humor is disarming, and it makes emotional expression much more comfortable, and that's across the board for emotion, because humor is connecting, and it takes away pressure.
Right. What I'm thinking is that that's an element that you might find in any type of music, but it's fundamentally undercutting element. It's an element that's inherent to anyone who feels a little uncomfortable with expressing themselves on this level, maybe.
Yeah. Well, I think the discomfort comes from the more heroic element, doesn't it? Because, all right, it's like with James Bond. If you're going to show James Bond being efficacious and he gets the girl and he's smooth and smart and well-dressed and expert and, he's got it together, he knows what he's doing, he's very effective, all of these, virtue and efficacy attributes, and the only way for Hollywood to, quote, make that okay, that romantic idealism, to make that okay, is to make him make fun of himself periodically. And I forget some of the particular cues that are in those films.
This is sort of inspired by Ayn Rand's essay "Bootleg Romanticism."
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because the only way that Hollywood people who feel uncomfortable with the romanticism can sneak it in is to simultaneously make fun of it.
Right.
And when you were there bringing up the question of diffusing some of the discomfort with humor, it was in the context of the heroic element, not in context of the I'm going to wreck myself, total chaos and mayhem, but in the concept of I'm going to keep going. They
parody that too, though.
Okay.
They parody all of it, like,
okay.
But that's there too. My thought is that with heroism, undercutting heroism, I'm going out on a limb a little here, but like undercutting heroism and romanticism to me seems to be a symptom of someone who's uncomfortable with the idea of achievement. It's like when you see a romantic play and you're just like, oh crap, I have to live up to that.
Yeah.
Let's make fun of it. Like let's make it sound like that's not really how it's supposed to be or something. As opposed to, I think what's going on with metal and sort of doing that, it's like adding the humor to metal. I think it's more along the lines of like you wrote your song and then you realize like, ooh, I put a little bit of too much of my heart into this. Like I'm not comfortable with showing it all the way. So let's put a little bit of funny into it to mask that a little. So it's same method, different motivation, I think.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah.
Fair enough. There are also quite subversive motivations. The example that I was going to bring up earlier is Cole Porter in shows like Anything Goes. His whole theme in that show is like a summary of his entire central expressive theme, which is undercutting morality with humor. That we're all we're all sinners, we all do bad things, and isn't that funny, and isn't that cute, and isn't that quaint? And this concept of morality is so, such an old-fashioned and cutely irrelevant idea. But the music that he does to do that is incredibly infectious, lighthearted, lively, bright, catchy music. And so it's subversion. It's using, the slightly silly, happy, lighthearted, bouncy emotions to delete the concept of morality from human civilization. Is essentially what he's doing. So this, using humor is a very fascinating thing because, as we just learned, there's a whole bunch of things you can do with it, good or bad. Music is metaphysical, and what I'm trying to get people to do is talk about the metaphysical content of music instead of just saying it's only a sensation and everybody likes different sensations. And so what we're having is the kind of conversation that I want to have, which is what is the substance of the music? What is it saying? And that's why, I'm not about this is a good song, this is a bad song, and you have to agree with that. I'm about let's actually talk about what the substance of the statement is that the song is making.
And then you might be able to levy a judgment for or against it.
That comes at the end, right?
Right.
And most of the value comes from the process of self-understanding that comes from unpacking all of it. But the Kantian take on music, which I'm analyzing in my book, is he says that music is just a sensation, and that's what everybody believes today. That it's like, well, what flavor of ice cream do you like? That's what music is.
Right.
And it's totally empty and totally devoid of meaning, and yet everyone, on some level, everybody knows how much meaning there is in music, but whenever they talk about it, they're dismissive and just regard it as, oh, it's just a sensation, and they just talk about, yeah, he likes this song, so-and-so likes that song, and that's the end of the conversation. And so what I'm trying to push here is, music makes a statement, and we need to talk about what statement it makes for any given song or kind of music or piece, whatever. It's much more, I think, common to have a conversation about like classical music or metal music because it's more plainly metaphysical as opposed to the pop song of the week kind of thing, which people do regard as just a sensation.
And I mean, I think it almost is, right? It is basically just a sensation.
Yeah, but my point is, if it's just a sensation, that too is a statement.
Right. It's because it's being purposefully shallow, basically.
Right, and it's saying that this is what you are, this is what you're made of, this is who you are, and this is all you are.
Right.
Right, and
that's interesting because I remember when I was young. When I was really young and like first exposed to, I was on a baseball team and exposed to a lot of other kids I didn't like. I noticed the type of music they would. And I went to this like private school where everyone was like super focused on learning and stuff. But then when I went to baseball, I was mixed in with just sort of the general population.
Okay.
To be elitist about this, I mean. Yeah, and it was a big difference, especially for a kid who can't really understand, like, okay, why are these people so savage and barbaric? Like,
okay.
It scared me, and part of what scared me was the music they listened to. Like, I remember thinking, I didn't say these words, but it felt like they're trying to break into my mind and destroy it. Mm-hmm. Like they're trying to make me stupid. It's like this is sounds that's going to make me stupid.
Yes.
And I told my dad something like that, and he's like, "Oh, like that's like no, that's just what they listen to, and it's different. That doesn't mean it's wrong, or." And so it's like that's sort of
there's that
sensationalist.
Yeah,
mindset.
Exactly. It's just a subjective taste preference, just a sensation, right? But you see, this is the honesty of kids, right?
Right.
When I've taught music appreciation, the 7-year-olds are better at capturing the emotional content of the music in words than I am. And it's because
Huh.
they just say it, and they have the words for it in whatever terms they have. And it's not necessarily every single 7-year-old, certain precocious ones in particular. But as a general pattern, children have more emotional honesty than adults. And it's not even necessarily an issue of honesty, because the older people get, the more convoluted their minds and emotions often become. People accumulate a lot of junk and baggage, and barriers and discomfort with saying things plain. And that's the emperor's new clothes kind of idea, that it's the kid who doesn't mind plainly stating what's what. And there were many times when I had students in music appreciation. I would say, okay, so how would you describe this piece? What is the emotion? And the kid says something, and I was like, just wow, I could not have said it better than that. Okay, so this.
So yeah, I was just concretizing your statement that it's not just sensation. There's like there's a metaphysical content to it.
Right, and when music is just a cheap, stupid making sensation, that is a statement of its own.
Right.
Right? It's like pragmatism is a philosophy that you should forget about philosophy and don't think, just act. But that itself is a philosophy.
Right. Yeah, that's a good parallel. Now, what exactly, when we I mean something particular when I say metaphysical? What do you see when we describe music as being metaphysical? What does that mean to you?
That it's a comment.
If that's not too much of a.
Yeah, it's a comment on how you see the world. Only in the case of music, what comes first is not the commentary about the world, but the commentary about yourself.
So it's metaphysical about the self.
Exactly.
Okay. Huh.
And this is where I agree with Ayn Rand, because she actually included the nature of man in metaphysics.
Right. Right. Yeah, it makes sense.
It's easy to think of metaphysics as being just an extrospective thing, and it can, it's like the planets and in the sky and the solid ground extending out from you. That's the world, and your view of that is your view of the world, and that's the metaphysical view. And that is true from the extrospective angle, but music doesn't have any of that. And even the other arts include a view of man as the being who's looking out at the world. But with music, it tends to come in the other order, that instead of commenting on the world with an implication about the self, it's commenting about the self with an implication about the world.
Right. Okay. Because and your argument for that would be because the psychological signature is the inherent. It's the thing that is the music in a sense, and so music is a psychological entity, not a existing entity.
Right. It's not an external material object.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's an internal object. Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly. We don't want to be too subjective in the way we say it, but it's an experiential object. So it is, produced by means of actual vibrations with actual mathematical relationships among them, but it's the action of mind that responds to and uses and processes those sensations. That's what it's really all about. And you need both. You have to take both into account. But it's what's going on in there that makes the statement.
Right.
Okay, so let me throw at you something else here. In my list of hypotheses about the psychology of heavy metal music, because I only had so many, and I didn't think I had a comprehensive understanding of it necessarily, but I thought I had some good key elements. One of the things that I observed about the headbangers that I knew is that and these were active headbangers, not like ex-headbangers, not people who say, I was a metalhead when I was 14, but now I'm older and I'm not so much into it. That's a different thing. I'm talking about active metalheads. They were extremely passive people. And that connected up clearly in the way that they felt and acted in terms of their frustration and blaming other people for supposedly controlling them. And there's a feeling of impotence and rage and authority figure objectification. You and I talked a little bit about this idea that in all of the hard rock music, to the extent that it involves rebellion and anti-authority kind of sentiments, there's like an image in the mind of, hey, teacher, leave those kids alone. There's the teacher figure hovering there, or maybe like in the corner of the room, invisible, as an omnipresent element, so that there's a mindset of wanting to stick it to that person, because actually the person never stands up for themselves in real life, so they get a fantasy of like a savage version of nailing it to the authority figures, because they either are unable or unwilling or maybe constrained, actually legitimately, unfortunately constrained from doing the self-assertive thing. But the main question was about this point of passiveness and how that factors into the depressive, languid element, but also spiraling up into the ragey anti-authority kind of thing.
All I can say regarding that is I don't think my particular way of enjoying metal has to do with that passivity.
Okay. Well,
it's usually what I use it towards is to actually motivate action.
Okay.
Is that I'll play. I mean, even just today, I was listening to metal music while writing an outline for my book.
Okay.
So
it's
yeah.
I'm confident that the people that I was thinking of that had that way of being would not have a conversation like this with me. So
right.
This is clearly one of the points of difference.
Right.
But, I had made the point to you that with the rebellion against authority figure, that there's nobody there. There's actually nobody there.
Right.
And does that mean anything to you?
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, so one band I really like despite its politics is Rage Against the Machine.
Yeah.
And there's literally, it's in the title, like, we're raging against the controlling element. We're rebelling against the controlling, the machine, they call it.
Yep.
Assuming there is some machine you feel as though you're raging against, it's kind of, it's like you're saying there is no machine, but, well, what if there is, though? I mean, a lot of times, if I see myself as the target of some kind of injustice, I will play this as mood music. For example, during tax season, I will listen to this sort of, that's the sort of emotion.
That's fascinating.
So there's a real thing to actually be raging against. Although, however,
it's not in the music.
Sort of like you as a 7-year-old, there's nothing there, I'm not going to actually do anything against the injustice wielded against me.
Right.
It's not practical for me to really stand up for myself, so I have to, fantasize about it while listening to this music.
Yes. So see, that is exactly it. It's like, I'm powerless in this situation, so I'm going to fantasize about having huge power / abusive power. Do you agree with that?
Well, I don't know about the abusive power, but yes, everything else I agree with.
Okay.
Yeah.
How would you say your response and thinking about this music has changed since the first conversation we had?
I haven't thought about that very much. If I had to guess, I've noticed that, like, I skip a lot of the songs on my playlist, or at least I have been skipping a lot of the songs on my playlist lately. I don't know if it was right after our conversation, but if I had to guess, there's sort of a subconscious, trend towards avoiding the more, poor me kinds of songs. Like I still
Mm-hmm.
do listen to some of those. And then in general, lately, at least since reading, not so much since we talked, but since reading your book, a lot of times I find myself when I listen to metal music, not always, but sometimes when I'm listening to it, um, I kind of have this feeling of, and I already told you about this, I have this feeling of, okay, come on, like you need to get over this and pursue the good things in life. Like you need
Okay.
to just kind of get over this. Like this isn't that important. It's just sort of this feeling like, all right, like, well, today I didn't feel that though. Today, I found it very hard to concentrate on my what's it called? On my outline.
Yeah.
Uh, didn't wake up in a great mood.
Okay.
So maybe that's why this sort of dismissive mindset that I'm talking about may have not happened today.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, see, that's interesting because I do think that's the way organic changes in one's thinking and feeling happen. There, it's an up and down process over time. You
Right.
know.
Yeah.
Um, and one of the things that we had talked about is you asked me, okay, so if you have laid out what music is and what makes it good, what do you expect people to now do? Do you think people should just have a list and I refuse to listen to this and so on? And I said no.
Right.
Uh, and that what I really advocate, which I'm glad you asked the question because I hadn't even made it explicit and I actually started writing it up now, is that I simply advocate the natural changes that happen in a person when they have increased self-understanding and knowledge of, in this case, music and what it is, but in life in general, understanding reality and understanding yourself. But the other thing that I wanted to come back to, because this is sort of the heart of everything in some way, is metal being an expression of power, strength, and energy. And like, get up and go, keep going, don't just go lazy on the bed, whatever. So the power, the get up and go, and the energy, would you agree that's something like hormonal drive? It's like agitate yourself into action.
Yeah, yeah. I often describe it as like I'll listen to this. I need to listen to this song to make my brain run fast enough to do this task.
And it's not just get your body to run fast enough, but get your brain to run fast enough.
It's specifically my brain. One thing that I do sometimes before drafting, when I draft, I need to draft as fast as possible so I don't second guess myself while drafting.
Gotcha.
Because like that's what they say. And so what I'll do, this is literally what I do. I listen to the fastest metal I possibly can,
Okay.
Dragon Force.
Yeah.
I play Call of Duty using a loadout that requires you to sprint around with a machine pistol and drink a lot of coffee. And it literally just makes my brain run fast. And I'll do that for only 10 minutes. And then I'll draft.
Okay. See, I could not function if I did that. But that is interestingly similar to something I've seen with my students, which is we'll be doing music exercises, and one of the, sight singing. And one of the constant problems for certain students in particular, but to a certain extent everybody, is the problem of self-doubt circuits. Like you read a few notes and then instead of going on to the next notes, your mind is going, wait, was that right? Did I just mess up that note? Wait, what's coming up? Wait, it's like this extra track of self-talk that's defeating the actual process of reading the music. By chance, one time, the students are around the piano and I'm playing and they're singing the exercise and suddenly they were much, much better than usual. And it's because two people came in late and were walking in the door, and while they were singing the exercise, they were kind of watching the people walk in the door. And then they suddenly said, well, wow, we were so much better than that time. I'm surprised because we were distracted by the people coming in the door. And I said, but you know why, right? It's because that occupies your self-doubt circuits.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that instead of that extra mental space being used for self-doubt, it's monitoring the people walking the door. So there's some significant thing there of managing mental process to avoid self-defeating self-doubt. Okay, so you're saying you use it to get your brain going.
Yeah.
But Beethoven wouldn't work because it is pulling you in?
it requires. I can't listen to Beethoven while doing the work. Maybe before I don't. Maybe I could listen. I could just sit there. Maybe I could just sit there, listen to it, and then feel a certain feeling, and then begin work.
Yeah.
But I couldn't do it while working. It's basically, and like I said earlier, it takes effort to listen to. It takes effort to fully absorb the music. Like It takes I have to chop off a full part of my brain and say, okay, this is the part that's listening to the music. So, and metal doesn't challenge me in that way. Whereas like something like dubstep, I don't like it because it requires so little of me that it's just boring, basically.
We also talked briefly about the difference between music as a utility versus music as a metaphysical statement in the
that's
previous conversation. One of the issues that's coming up here is I'm going to use this music for the question of I'm going to use this music for speeding myself up or blocking out my potential too much self-questioning, that sort of thing, which is utilitarian rather than what statement does the sound make.
Mm-hmm.
Does thinking about the statement made by the music deflate, undercut, alter the utility of it for the brain management?
Yeah. I mean, and for only one reason is because I'm concentrated on what it means and not on whatever it is I'm trying to do right now. One thing I have occasionally done is I've listened to as sort of to motivate me to work, and this is a much more positive. We've been running through mainly my more like hardcore negative things that I do. One of the more positive things I do is I'll listen to what are they called? Pictures at the museum.
Pictures at an exhibition.
Pictures at an exhibition. Yeah. I'll listen to that before just doing some work I find meaningful. And what that does is that the sound it reminds me of. I don't think of pictures at an expedition or an exposition. I think of more like a hero having like a crown put on his head or something like that. And so there's this image of, and so it motivates, but I can't listen to that while working. I listen to it before and then begin working. So that's still serving a utilitarian purpose, but it's also metaphysical. It's metaphysical bleeding into a utilitarian purpose. Like, but yeah, it is metaphysical. Like it's making me feel like it's fueling me. Like this is, it's what Ayn Rand said. Sort of that's why these metaphysical statements are in need. It's reminding you what you're working for.
Yes.
Emotionally.
Yes.
Yeah.
And in that case, the fact that you're listening to the music beforehand and not during, you're basically saying I listen to the music for what it is saying, and then afterward I carry an emotional benefit. And you're not saying I deliberately have the music on to not listen to it in order so I can do something else and have it occupy some of the maybe self-defeating brain circuits.
Right. Yeah. It's completely different. Before, I didn't understand the difference. I just noticed that I couldn't listen to that song while working. I had to do it before to put me in the mood, so to speak. So I wasn't aware of the difference. But yeah, that's the difference. Is one is metaphysical. The other one is, as I used to say, just getting my brain to run at the right speed.
If the Mussorgsky sets you in the mode of the heroic pride and that triumphant vision, what does the metal do in terms of asserting a metaphysics?
So let's say I'm working on a certain problem, and I'm getting it wrong because there's something I'm overlooking. And so I could attempt this problem 30 million times with the mindset I'm currently using, and I'll never get it. Right? Like that's how a lot of things work, and at least in math, it's like if you have one bad assumption, you could keep hitting the problem over and over again. You'll never get it.
Right.
So, and something that's made me much more effective as a thinker in the last few years is to say, no, this isn't a race. This isn't about running. This is about backing up and questioning your assumptions. This isn't about sweat, blood, and tears. This is about stepping back, and it's about thinking. It's going to be easy if you think about it right. I'm trying to adopt this more easy way of thinking it. And maybe what the metal might do is it might encourage me to say, like, no, just power through it. And it's like, well, you're powering into a brick wall. You need to walk in a place where there isn't a brick wall instead of trying to walk through the brick wall.
Yes,
so,
because the metaphysics and the process of mind is you cannot sort, make patterns, identify in order to solve the problem. You just have to brute force through and raw and rough keep going.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that puts you in the wrong mindset for problem solving.
Okay.
So maybe that's something I should think about, really.
See, this is where, because now we're not as different as I thought we were, because I was wondering, like, if I put that music on, I would not function whatsoever. There's nothing I could, like, could I use that sonic noise to block out cognitive noise? No. It would, defeat my brain activity completely. I'm very much the, analytical sorter, So anyway, it does explain, there's a reason that the music of the Enlightenment happened in the Enlightenment, and the music of brain noise happened at the time of this age of subjectivism and brain noise. Well, I appreciate you joining me, and I appreciate your bold honesty on the whole subject. There are very, very few people I can have a substantive conversation with like this, so I really appreciate it. And it's I'm challenging a lot of things that people think today, so it's nice to talk to somebody who is willing to be challenged and not be intimidated, not be cowed, and not be rigid.
Well, thanks. I I really appreciate that.
So thanks again for the conversation, and maybe we can do it again.
Yeah, text me anytime.
All right, talk to you later.
All right,
bye.
See ya.